unabashed,
the most unpredictable,
becomes a headline,
the most volatile,
outrageous behavior,
unsubstantiated narratives,
a battle of personalities.
Welcome to Grand Tamasha. I'm your host, Milan of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. We're just days away from the start of the first phase of the 2019 general elections on April 11th. Joining me to discuss the latest political developments in India is Sadanand Dhume, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Sadanand, thanks for coming back.
Good to be back.
So you've just returned from India, and I want to begin with a column that you wrote last Friday for the Wall Street Journal based on your recent trip. In it, you write, quote, "With nationalist sentiment surging after a confrontation with Pakistan and the opposition in disarray, an outcome that appeared uncertain a few months ago looks exceedingly likely. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, leader of the Hindu nationalist BJP, is poised to win a second term." Tell us why you think the narrative has shifted in favor of Modi and the BJP.
So this is only partly from my trip, right? So I spent a couple of days talking with people, and my sense, at least, in Delhi and Western Uttar Pradesh, was speaking with dozens of people. I got an overwhelming feeling that he remains extremely popular, and that Modi has successfully framed this as an election about himself, as an election about national toughness, about being a selfless worker who is taking the country in the right direction. And people aren't really paying that much attention to the kinds of things we pay attention to over here, right? Did demonetization work? What did the airstrikes in Balakot in fact hit? So the details kind of get lost, and what you're left with is this broad story. And that broad story is about Modi still remaining popular.
Now, conversely, you did talk to people about Rahul Gandhi in the Congress Party. What reaction did his name provoke amongst the Indians that you spoke with?
So it's clear, two things are clear. The first is that, since Rahul Gandhi was sort of relaunched towards the end of 2017, he has recovered ground among a section of the urban population. English-speaking people, a lot of people who've been dismayed by some of the policy choices and some of the rhetoric of the BJP government. He suddenly started looking a little bit more plausible. But when you go lower down the socioeconomic ladder, I think his credibility has effectively been shredded. Now, we can argue about whether it's been justifiably shredded or it's been shredded by this very effective BJP machine. But the fact is that when you speak with people about him, they just don't take him seriously. They see him still as a somewhat childish figure. They see him as, one guy said to me, well, he doesn't even know how to speak properly. And you hear that over and over. And so I think it's a real problem for the Congress, especially since the BJP under Modi is, they're quite skillfully positioning this as a quasi-presidential contest.
So when you talk to voters in Western Uttar Pradesh, which is a place where the BJP did very well, and throughout the state, but particularly in Western Uttar Pradesh last time around, and you talked about things like the economy, sort of bread and butter issues, what did people have to say? I mean, because, you read the media and there are a lot of grievances people have, whether it's demonetization, whether it's GST, whether it's low crop prices, lack of employment. Did those things just not register?
People are willing to have those conversations, but what I find quite remarkable is that they are either not willing to blame Modi for whatever troubles they have, or they're willing to give him a second chance. And actually, this is something that you touched upon in your piece in the Washington Post, right? It's almost as though people have decided that they like him and they want to vote for him again, and they are looking for an excuse. And these recent tensions with Pakistan have given them that excuse. So, for example, on the economy, one thing that came up over and over was how cows were basically running loose in these and destroying people's fields. And you would imagine that this would be a pretty big deal for farmers. But it is. But I found that they would sort of typically blame Yogi, the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, and somehow not make that direct connection and say that, look, I'm going to put this at Modi's feet.
Shivam Vij had this piece in the print, and he had traveled to Western UP, and he said something very similar, which is people have various grievances, but Modi's like Teflon, right? It's either the bureaucrats' fault, it's the BJP, the party's fault, it's the state government's fault. So things that are good have been credited to Modi, but things that people are really angry about don't seem to sort of stick to him. Shekhar Gupta published a piece this weekend in The Print with the headline, "It's Modi versus 20 strong state leaders, and there is no wave in the air." And what I found interesting about this piece is he says, this election is really much more like 2004 than 2014, insofar as that it's an election that's really going to be made up of a series of state-level verdicts as opposed to a single, presidential contest. And I'm wondering if you agree with, Shekhar's assessment.
It's never one or the other, right? I mean, I would have to say that, that's probably true of some states. I don't know if that's true of the whole country. It's very easy to imagine this as a quasi-presidential election in a large chunk of the country, in the Hindi heartland, essentially, right? In UP, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and a lot of the states where the BJP has done well, and more of a state-by-state contest in places where the BJP doesn't have much of a footprint, or where there are very powerful state-level leaders such as Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal. So I'm not sure I don't entirely disagree with Shekhar, but I think that it can be a bit of both.
I mean, what's interesting is what you just said, I think sort of represents what happened in 2014 in a way, which is in the Hindi heartland, in northwest central India, you saw this kind of pro-BJP movement on the back of Modi wave. But, you go to the east, you go to the south, whether it's Tamil Nadu, Bengal, Odisha, okay, the BJP maybe did better than the past, but the regional parties still dominated, right? It's not as if the BJP made much of a dent in some of those states, at least in terms of seats won. I want to ask you about something else you wrote recently, this one in the Times of India, in which you warn of the adverse consequences of majoritarianism and majoritarian chauvinism in India. And you write, quote, "If the World Bank had an ease of doing bigotry ranking, India's startling progress since 2014 would leave many countries in the shade." What do you think has changed in India since 2014?
I mean, just to clarify, progress was in inverted
Was
commas.
right, quote, unquote,
Right.
Progress.
Sorry, what was your question again?
What do you think has changed? I mean, how would you describe this tilt? Because, many within the BJP say, look, whether it's Ram Temple, whether it's Article 370, which gives separate status to Jammu and Kashmir, whether it's Uniform Civil Code, the BJP government hasn't moved on any of these things. So how can you say that there's a rising tide of majoritarian nationalism?
So it's a piece really more than anything else it's about rhetoric. And I think that's where you see the most startling difference between India in 2019 and 2014. It's not as if Modi has moved dramatically on policy anywhere, right? Not in foreign policy, not in economic policy, and not on these Hindu nationalist issues. I mean, you're absolutely right. I don't think India is necessarily anywhere closer to much closer to the Ram Temple. But he has allowed one thing, which is that senior members of the ruling party and senior members of government are allowed to or are able to express themselves in ways that are incredibly crude, hostile, and offensive towards the Muslim minority. And this was something that never happened. It never happened. It didn't happen in the previous BJP government. It hasn't happened in 70 years. So it's that these people have no restraint. And here, my article is just confined to senior BJP figures, people like the president of the party who likened Bangladeshi migrants to termites. I'm not even getting into Yogi Adityanath, who's the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, and his entire career is built on Muslim baiting. And I'm not even going anywhere close to the trolls and the people on Twitter, right? But in terms of how senior people are allowed to express themselves on what are very sensitive issues, it's been extremely alarming. And I'm just hoping that someone gets the message. No, this is not sustainable in any country. And I'm hoping that if they come back to power again, which I think they will, someone gets the message and says that, look, if you want to run this country, which has 175 million Muslims, you need to learn to conduct yourselves responsibly.
Now, you say in the piece, quote, that the BJP has no choice but to evolve a way to actively accommodate religious diversity, end quote. How do you think the BJP executes a pivot? What would it have to do to sort of demonstrate this kind of accommodation?
So it's not really that difficult, right? I'm not saying that they are going to end up in the same place as Congress, or they're going to end up in the same place as the left. I'm not even saying that they should necessarily be seeking to satisfy their critics who look at things from a dramatically different perspective. But you need to have a basic level of verbal hygiene. And that, frankly, should not be difficult to accomplish because there are many figures in the BJP who themselves conduct themselves reasonably responsibly. You don't see Sushma Swaraj, the foreign minister, mouthing off in this way. You don't even see Rajnath Singh, the home minister, mouthing off in this way. So as long as you have an unwritten rule that is enforced, that if you are holding a high position, whether in government or in the party, you are expected not to be insulting and abusive towards a large minority community, or frankly, any minority community. That should not be difficult, particularly for a strong man like Modi to enforce.
And where do you put Modi himself in terms of his rhetoric, right? I mean, is he more in the Sushma camp or is he more in the Amit Shah camp?
He's tricky. I would say that over 5 years, he's mostly been responsible. He said the right things. He said things like Islam is a religion of peace. He's actively quoted Middle Eastern leaders. However, what you do see is when he's campaigning, when the pressure gets to him, he's not able to maintain that consistency. So, for example, recently he attacked Rahul Gandhi for picking a seat in Kerala, and Modi's attack essentially boiled down to the fact that, well, why are you going and contesting in a place that has a lot of Muslims and Christians? I mean, it's just appalling, right? I mean, can you imagine any leader of the past in India saying something like that? Effectively, what he's saying is that, well, there's something wrong with you if many of your constituents happen to be of another religion.
Right. I mean, he also made a reference to saying if there were another terrorist attack and Congress were in power, they would feed the terrorist biryani and treat him well, as opposed to, to prosecute him in the way that his government would.
This biryani obsession is really something.
Right. I mean, you keep coming back, including, there's that obsession and then the obsession just generally with, the Pakistan rhetoric, right? If the BJP suffers a setback this time around, its opponents in Pakistan will be setting off crackers, which is something we heard back in Bihar in 2015, and we're hearing again now. I want to end, as we always do each week, asking you to share with our listeners one story coming out of India that you think we need to be paying attention to that perhaps we're not as much as we should.
Well, I think, the Andhra Pradesh story, we were discussing this a little bit earlier, is actually very interesting, right? The return or the resurrection of Jagan Reddy. And the reason I find this interesting is that if you're skeptical about the Congress party's prospects, a large reason for that is that they're basically not in the game anymore in Andhra. And if you look at their return to power in 2004 and again their victory in 2009, a large part of it was built on a solid bloc in the south, right, of which Andhra was the most important state. So I think that is a story that's worth paying attention to.
And I think that's one way in which 2004 and 2014 are very different. People are saying, well, we expected the BJP to win 2004 and we were upset, but Andhra Pradesh is very different this time around. So one story that I caught my attention that's not a political story in the electoral sense is the story about Indore and how Indore, Madhya Pradesh, has become India's cleanest city. Over the past several years, more than 600 city corporations have visited Indore to figure out how a city has managed to, I think for the last 2 or 3 years, top the cleanliness charts. So from building toilets to just doing things like installing, waste baskets and dustbins to, live tracking of garbage vans and garbage pickup, Indore has managed to create, by all accounts, a sort of decent urban landscape for its citizens. It's something that's lacking in many other parts of India. Who do you think had the best week in India this past week?
Probably a pretty good week for Modi. We've been talking a little bit about the polls. A couple of polls, the trend lines look pretty good for him. CSDS shows him back essentially to mid-2017 levels. Seems to have captured some of that momentum that he had been losing in the months leading up to the state elections in December. That seems to be firmly on his side again. So I would say it's been a pretty good week for Modi and the BJP.
So I'm going the opposite way and saying I think the Congress had a good week, although it's all relative, in the sense that I think they managed to make a bit of a splash with the Congress manifesto, the central component of which, of course, is this idea of a minimum income support scheme for India's 20% of its poorest households. It is an issue, broadly speaking, the economy, that they should have been hammering Modi on much more consistently and effectively, not just for the past few weeks, but the past several months, several years. And they're coming around to it quite late. Many people have argued, including myself, that it seems like too little, too late. But for a brief moment, they seem to have captured the spotlight. Who do you think had the worst week?
I'm not sure who had the worst week. I mean, I would have to say if Modi had the best week, it was not a great week for Congress, Nyay notwithstanding. I'm a bit of a skeptic on that, right? I think that first of all, I'm not a fan of the plan itself, but also I think they got a little bit confused in the details. They've had to sort of, recover, as opposed to if they had just had a clean way of getting the messaging across, whatever we think of it as a policy, I think it could have been more effective as an electoral tool. When I was in Uttar Pradesh, they'd already made this announcement. I mean, the people I was talking to, farmers, they'd either not heard of it, or if they'd heard of it, they was sort of like, well, what exactly is this and how seriously should we take
My
this?
vote for the worst week is senior BJP incumbents. We saw L.K. Advani denied a ticket to contest from Gandhinagar. Murli Manohar Joshi, another BJP warhorse, was told he would not be nominated. Shatrughan Sinha, who had occupied a seat from Patna in Bihar, is now joined the Congress party. So that entire older generation, which had already been somewhat marginalized in speaking out, has been clearly and definitively, I think, shown their place. And we've seen murmurings that Joshi might even be courted by the Congress party, which is almost hard to imagine given his politics and how the Congress has been a sworn enemy of his for decades. But I think they certainly did not have a good week. Sadanand, thanks for coming back on the show.
To be back.
So after a quick break, I'll be back to talk with Hindustan Times journalist Snigdha Poonam on her reporting on India's first-time voters and her recent book, Dreamers, on the aspirations of India's youth. So my guest on the podcast today is Snigdha Poonam. Snigdha is national affairs reporter for the Hindustan Times and author of the acclaimed book Dreamers, How Young Indians Are Changing the World. She, more than anyone I know, has her finger on the pulse of young Indians, who are an extremely important demographic as India gets ready for the start of national polls on April 11th. Dreamers is a tour de force exploration of the aspirations and anxieties of India's youth. Snigdha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking you not about your book, but about a related series that you've kicked off here at HT, which profiles a young voter each week who will be exercising his or her franchise in the 2019 general elections. What was the motivation for this series, and what have you learned so far?
Well, I'm partly reporting and partly editing these profiles that began in January, and then look at one first-time voter every week. Obvious reasons. There are going to be between 15 and 18 million people voting for the first time. I mean, there are constituencies in which there will be hundreds of thousands of people who will vote for the first time. And these are people who are outside of the framework of disappointment. So they have expectations but no disappointments, theoretically so far. They're also so young that one assumes that they'll be impressionable, and you can start afresh, and you can the things that would matter to them will be different, and then you can have a fresh start. So therefore first time voters are very, very important to this election. What we've learned so far are many, many things, but I think that the one major takeaway for me from reading and writing and reporting so many of these profiles has been that we've been talking about elections for a long time, and the issues that have seemed to matter are, more or less jobs and rural distress and corruption, whether it's Rafale or other defense deals. But when you talk to first-time voters, they are very young. I think that's the major takeaway. They are between the ages of 18 and mainly 20, 21. So even I wasn't prepared for just how disconnected they feel from our world. So jobs, the moment that you speak to a young voter, you talk to them about jobs. But the first-time voters don't necessarily care about jobs that much, because most of them are either in college or they're kind of in the education framework, and so they haven't really they haven't really given it that much thought. They're still kind of like setting out for the workforce. So the disappointments or the expectations aren't that many. So for many of them, like reservations was a bigger issue in like education or even scholarships at local level than jobs. And some of them said that will maybe the next time around it will matter more, but for now it isn't.
So, traditionally in India, youth voter turnout has lagged behind that of the overall population. That's true in many countries, that young voters often don't come out to vote. In 2014, in part because of the excitement about Narendra Modi and his potential leadership, youth turnout actually surpassed overall turnout. How are young people feeling about the 2019 race, and is that excitement around Narendra Modi sort of still palpable?
I think so. I think that I still hear a lot of admiration from him, about him, admiration for Narendra Modi. And I think that, we're talking about a generation of voters who are more digitally connected. And with BJP's like digital reach, I don't have to make the point that they're the party with like the maximum reach.
Right, social media,
Yes,
WhatsApp.
social media,
right.
WhatsApp, Facebook. So that still matters. But I would still say that these are, when you look at first-time voters, and I'm sure you already know that, they are not like aliens. So a lot of them are talking about things that are very specific to their contests. So I think regions matter a lot. So when you talk to people in UP, the disappointments with Narendra Modi or Yogi Adityanath is very, very clear. And they may be 17, they may be 18, but they are very, very articulate about the disappointments, whether it's like the cows eating their crop or the Yogi government not following up on schemes. Whereas if you talk to young voters in Gujarat, they're, which I did a few weeks ago, they're very, very attached to BJP and Mr. Modi. And I think that regions matter also because like Congress has had absolutely no presence politically in Gujarat for such a long time that when I ask them, and this is so different from like a UP or Haryana or Maharashtra, when I ask them what they think of Rahul Gandhi, the young Gujaratis weren't able to say a single thing, not because they didn't want to say something, but honestly they did not know. So
He was sort of a blank slate.
So Priyanka Gandhi had just jumped into politics that very week, and when I asked them what they thought of that, they said that they didn't know because on their mobile phones they haven't received a single news update about that. They have no opinions on Rahul Gandhi or Priyanka Gandhi. So like regions matter also, like when you talk to Dalits, when you talk to OBCs, when you talk to like Brahmins and Thakurs, and these are like there are people who are, in most cases, they're telling you things that they have heard from their families. In cases where their opinions differ from those of their parents or grandparents, it's interesting. It's interesting what are those issues, and I think that for the first-time voters, I think they're more idealistic. So it's not so much jobs and farmers' distress that they want to talk about, but more economy and development. And
kind of aspirational
yes,
things.
like nationalism, and I think India's image in the world, and these are, and not like very specific issues, and I think that on some of these counts, they're still impressed by Modi.
And by and large, where do these young people seem to be getting their news from? And we hear a lot anecdotally about people relying much more on social media, on WhatsApp, on different chat groups. Do you find that new media sort of dominates their kind of political intake of news and information about elections?
Yes, except that what we think is new media is already old media for them.
Right.
Like when I was reporting Dreamers or when I covered the last elections, I think Facebook was so major, and I think like most of BJP's online strategy was centered around Facebook. But like we haven't been able to find a single first-time voter in these 3 months who is active on Facebook.
So you mean they've already moved beyond Facebook?
They have moved way beyond Facebook. If you talk to like a 19-year-old today or 17 or 18-year-old today, they will tell you that I have met people who have never posted on Facebook. And they feel disconnected. They don't understand the long like text updates. Obviously, video is suddenly everywhere, and but BJP is also on it. But I think in smaller ways, Congress is even like Mamata Banerjee's party is making small TikTok videos and spreading them through. I hope that you know what TikTok.
I do. I'm not that
TikTok is.
old.
Okay. And circulating them on WhatsApp. So I think these things have changed a lot. WhatsApp itself, the number of people who've told us that they think WhatsApp is a medium on which their parents receive fake news.
Wow.
So I
So they
think
really are able to discern between legitimate news and what are these crazy fake, WhatsApp forwards that you get.
well, in at least half of these profiles, these are people who are the first of their family to receive proper education, like to
Right.
go to school, college, or do so many things that no one's ever done before. So they're smarter, they're more cynical, they're more exposed. And I think that the whole trust factor in WhatsApp and Facebook is something that they really think about. And I think that they're less willing to trust what they receive on WhatsApp than their parents.
I want to ask you about one of the young women you profiled. Her name is Komal Agarwal. She's a law student from Haryana. You profiled for the series. She attributes a lot of the positive change in her state that she sees around her, whether it's infrastructure, women's safety, scholarships, to initiatives that Modi has launched since coming to power. She admits, when sort of pressed, that not everything is perfect, but she says Modi needs another 5 years. He should be given another chance, right? How common is this sentiment that whatever people might say about Modi, whatever we might think, that he deserves another shot, right? 5 years isn't enough.
Quite common still. I think that for a lot of people, even though they may not know that much about BJP's work, I think Modi still holds the appeal. But again, I would say, when we look at her background, she's Komal Agarwal. She's from a family of like Baniyas in Haryana. They have generations of there's generations of like men in her family who've done business, and they've had disappointments with BJP, with demonetization. Some of them had to like shut shops, she said, but still they will not vote for Congress. So I think she kind of comes from that context. But if you talk to Muslims, let's say, I think that's very interesting that there are people I've spoken to who know nothing about politics. There's a 22-year-old who told me that he knows that Narendra Modi is the Prime Minister of India, but when I asked him if he's heard of Amit Shah, he said, isn't he Modi's best friend?
Well, that could also be true.
That can also be true, but he knows absolutely nothing except for one thing, and that's that Modi is not good for Muslims.
Wow.
And I think that, for OBCs, again, and some of these profiles have been of young voters from OBC background. These are like caste, region, these things continue to matter a lot, whether or not they are 17 or 70.
So I want to ask you actually about religion. So in your book, Dreamers, one of the themes that you dive into is nationalism and how many disgruntled youth, especially disgruntled men, have become sort of ripe for the kind of appeals that Hindu nationalist entities espouse. So for Indian millennials or Generation Z, what's the allure of some of the messages that the RSS, the VHP, the Bajrang Dal convey? What do they find in those nationalist messages?
It depends on the messaging, and I don't think that that every nationalist message can appeal to every young disgruntled man in UP or Haryana. For example, Ram Mandir holds very, very little significance for them, especially first-time voters. There are so many people in Ayodhya who are who are young and who don't know anything about Ram Mandir. It's not that they don't care about religion, but messaging matters, issues matter. They want to participate in something. They care more about issues in which they can participate, not about Ram Mandir that happened at a time when they were not around. They had no role to play. So cows really worked for a long time. But most of these vigilantism around cows were based in UP or Haryana or Rajasthan, and in these places situation has changed. I've met people in families where went out and became Gaurakshaks who are now complaining that their families are suffering because of stray cows. So that there's been some shift there. But I think that with the India-Pakistan border situation, that BJP is again able to, BJP or RSS or VHP or Bajrang Dal is again able to appeal to them in a way that was a bit simmering down for a while.
So I want to end by asking you a question about women. Just as there's been a sizable gap between youth participation and the overall population, there's also been a similar gap in political participation between men and women. There's historically been quite a significant turnout gap on election day. In 2014, that gap shrunk to its lowest level, smallest margin ever, slightly under 2 percentage points. It's quite possible, many people are predicting in 2019 that men and women will be voting at roughly similar rates. What does some of your field reporting tell you about the nature of women's participation? I mean, do you see at the ground level that kind of churn that the data suggests, where more women are coming out, they're more free to express their mind? Yes, female candidacy is still quite limited. We know the number of female MPs is quite abysmal relative to their share of the population. But do you see a new kind of social or political mobilization from women, including young women?
I mean, across ages, I feel that in my reporting and in the profiles that I'm getting to edit, women seem to go more by a party's governance record than men, and based on issues that impact their lives more immediately. In the most striking example, there is this family in Madhya Pradesh where the husband and the wife voted differently in the last assembly elections because the woman was swayed by the woman voted for BJP because she was thankful to the party for giving her son, this is a low-income family, so for giving her son a scholarship to go to an engineering college, whereas the husband was more concerned that the BJP had not chosen the right candidates. And so it's like a macro issue, and he wasn't happy about that, so he voted for Congress. In like very different places, Haryana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, women have told me very specific issues with schemes. Like there are schemes that I didn't know names of that I have that the women seem to like know everything about, from like toilets to gas cylinders to scholarships to banks and loans and everything. And these are things that they are watching and keep track of. And I think that that's something that political parties should care more about.
The book's called Dreamers: How Young Indians Are Changing the World. We'll link to the book page on the website, and including a review I wrote of the book in Foreign Affairs. It's one of, I think, the best books on Indian political economy, even though, Snigdha, you got some flack, I think, from your father of your family saying, why don't you write a book on the economy?
Economy, yes.
I would submit this is a book on the economy, although it's not pitched that way, and you could read the work that Snigdha and our colleagues are doing every week on First-Time Voters. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Milan.
Grant Tamasha is a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. You can find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps others find the show more easily. For more information about the show and to find the writing we reference on this week's episode, visit our website, granttamasha.com. Production assistance comes from Jamie Hinson and Rachel Osnos. Tim Martin's our audio engineer, and Lauren Duax our executive producer. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.